Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to the conversation. Today, we are tackling the topic of what we need to know about safe learning environments and why this is so important to us as clinicians as we work with clients in an educational setting. We have a fantastic panel today. I want to welcome Benita Gordon. She is the founder of Global Education Concierge. Belinda Gordon Battle. She is the owner of BGB Counseling Services, where she serves as a clinical therapist. And Cherissa Watson, sorry, am I saying that right? I think
yes.
I am. A licensed mental health counselor and certified clinical trauma professional. Welcome, everyone, to the conversation.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here. Okay, so we're just going to dive right into this. We have a ton to cover. I think we should go ahead and just start with talking about what an emotionally safe educational setting means. Let's just define that first of all. Belinda, you want to start us off?
Absolutely, I can do that. Before I even get into that, though, I want to just thank you, Noelle, and Niznik Behavioral Health Center, just for recognizing how important this issue is around our young people and trauma and our educators. So thank you for creating this platform and allowing us to speak on it. When I work in the school system, I always want to make sure that everybody that's in our circle understands how important it is for the educators to be emotionally healthy, and also for our young people, our students, our scholars to be emotionally healthy. That's how we create a safe school, a safe community, and we allow our students to take that home. What that looks like in the classroom is that there is a relationship. The quality of the relationship between the educator and the scholar and colleagues is intact. It's healthy. We care about each other and we are getting the work done in the classroom. That to me is what an emotionally healthy school looks like.
Benita, would you add anything to that?
The only thing I would add is that we also now, because we're coming back from being at home virtual, where the school building closed, but the school never shut down, we now have a larger or increased ability to contact and communicate with parents. And so even though parents are not in the building per se with us, it is now essential that we have a healthy relationship with, and not just the parents. I like to say now they're adults, because sometimes, a lot of times, our students are not being raised by biological parents, they're being raised by their adults in their lives. And so it's important for us to have a healthy relationship with their adults.
What would you say to educators who are listening to this discussion on emotional safety and say, because I've heard educators say this, I was trained to educate. I was not trained to babysit. I was not trained to emotionally attend to my students. That's what I was trained for. Cherissa, what are your thoughts?
I would say, that is common and we hear that a lot, but things have to take a shift. Counselors are trained to counsel, teachers are trained to teach, but there's still some roles that you have to play as being emotionally responsive, being open to the learning and teaching that's happening. They go together, they go hand in hand. So you can't just stick to, I'm a teacher and teacher by trade, and that's what I do. You have to attend to the emotional needs to be able to create a safe learning environment for students.
Do you feel like that is a huge undertaking in and of itself to create the shift if there isn't that fundamental understanding of how we think of ourselves? I'm not an educator. I'm just saying how educators think of themselves in terms of emotionally meeting needs. That in and of itself is an undertaking.
It definitely is.
Oh, go ahead, Cherissa, jump in.
Oh yeah, it definitely is an undertaking, and it's gonna take support and it's gonna take time to kind of collaborate with clinical professionals and educators coming together to kind of swap and trade tips and strategies that work in the classroom that work in the therapy setting and kind of have them mirrored in each place.
I wanted to just add something, Noelle, because
Yeah.
one of the most amazing things for me that came from working in the pandemic and allowing, like Benita said, us to go into a virtual world where we could actually contact and interact with the adults, the parents, the guardians of our young people, but also it opened up an opportunity for educators to connect with clinicians on a whole completely different level. But when you say that educators sometimes say, oh, I'm not responsible for the emotional piece, I always say that gives me an opportunity to differentiate between a teacher and an educator. An educator understands emotional safety, emotional health, and they are open to learning about those fundamental items needed in their classroom space. And they will collaborate, as Cherissa said, with clinicians in their school and in their community to provide that level of support. A teacher oftentimes will say, I'm here to teach.
Yeah.
And then there's a period at the end of that. But educators, they have that ability to see beyond the print, the black and white in front of them. They have a tendency to be able to see the colors. And that's where clinicians are able to come in and support. That is what makes us good partners.
So piece this together for us in terms of education. Okay, so we get it. It's important for emotional safety. That sounds reasonable. Why? What is the significance in terms of education?
Yeah.
Tie those pieces together for us. Anyone, jump in.
So one of the things that, well, I'm going to go back a little bit. One of the things we see now is that we have to change how we're preparing educators. And that goes back to that teacher preparation programs. So we have to literally start going back and saying, I know that we have given you all these education classes, but you also need an education psychology class. You also need a class on how to do conflict resolution. So we have to go back and really, really dig deep into preparing them before we release them from schools, from education into public schools, private schools, parochial schools. And then the second part is, we know once you hit that classroom that we are dealing with human children. Human children, humans, we will not do anything for you unless we trust you and we have a relationship with you. And that is in itself understanding the emotional aspect of our students. And in the midst of a pandemic, because it's not over, we have just shifted how we do things. In the midst of a pandemic, even myself as an educator, I caught myself the other day when I was speaking to a student and we needed to have an adult involved in the conversation. And I had to pause for a moment. And before I could say your mother or your father, I had to say, who is the person right now that's responsible for you? That right there is how we make sure that we are emotionally adjusting ourselves. What we used to do, that is thrown out of the window. And once I said that and got to understand that that was the best thing for that student because she was being raised by an aunt. And so she was like, nobody's ever said that to me. Nobody's ever said, she said, nobody's ever put it like that, where it made me comfortable to say, yes, my loving aunt has taken me in and she's my provider, and not feel guilty or feel some kind of way about it. So we have to, in education, we have to stop what we used to do because everything has shifted and changed. Our kids have lost parents in the pandemic. And we have to remember that things have shifted and the emotional part of it, it is now our responsibility to connect with our students and understand that.
So, okay, I'm hearing how important the relationship is.
Yeah.
The relationship. So let's talk about what that ideally looks like. If you are going to paint your perfect picture of, okay, here's an educator, here's the educational setting, here's the students, here's what this relationship looks like. Paint that picture for us.
So for me, the first thing for there to be a healthy relationship, and I have a special, I have a niche in my practice that's just for educators. It's their own space, it's their own bubble, it's their opportunity to come in and to actually decompress because the pressures and the stress from being an educator, because we forget that educators, this is the only profession where you touch all of the other professions. The children that go through our schools become our doctors, our lawyers, et cetera, et cetera. But those people, doctors and lawyers, they don't touch every child. You know, you have to remember that. So there's a level of stress for educators. And for me, and my pursuit as a clinician is to make sure that the educators are as healthy as possible. I encourage them to become part of and negotiate with their school system to make sure they understand how EAP, employment assistance programs, work, where they can actually receive clinical services so they can deal with their own concerns, their own issues, their own trauma in their homes and in their families before they walk into the school, before the school bell rings. Are you healthy before you go into that school? So for me, it starts there and working with our educators and making sure that they are as healthy as possible.
Do you feel like this is a problem right now? Are we giving the emotional support to our educators needed to create healthy students? What are we missing?
I think we are moving in that direction, but I don't think we're there yet.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I think that the needs have shifted and changed with the pandemic. And so we have to adjust to meet the need. But teachers are going through so much, students are going through so much, clinicians are going through so much. And this is a time where we're all kind of experiencing some of the same things at the same time. So, you know, losing someone, the grief, the loss, the trauma, maybe loss of finances, maybe someone isn't working. There's a lot of different factors that are going on, and we can definitely increase support for educators, for teachers, for clinicians, for students.
So let's get back to this idea of education then, because ultimately that's what we're talking about, setting up the situation so that we have incredible education going on. So we're talking about healthy educators who create this environment for healthy students. But what happens in the educational process when all of these things come together? Can you give us like some boots on the ground examples of where it goes terribly wrong, so that we can contrast it to the aha moment of when it goes very right? So what are our red flags here?
I think one of our red flags is truancy. When we have students that are not engaged and don't feel comfortable and safe enough to come into the school and interact and socialize with their classmates, people of their own age, their peers. Truancy is an indicator that there's some issues of safety and there's some issues of emotional concern that clinicians need to get involved with and support in that process. And we have to partner with our teachers because they will be the first ones to let us know that there's an issue with a student coming into the school. And then once a student is in the school, there are things that can be red flags also. If they are still not able to engage, if you see students that are getting into verbal or even physical confrontations with their peers and or with staff, that is a red flag. That's a concern that the teacher needs to alert the clinician and let the clinician know there's something else going on here. And the one last one I consider a red flag is on the opposite end of the spectrum. Is when I see a student in the classroom environment and I see that everyone is engaged and this one student is not.
Isolating.
Completely isolated, extremely quiet, unable to pull him or herself out of their own head. They're so stressed. They're under so much stress from whatever trauma may have occurred or whatever issues they may be going on. They are not there. They're not present in the classroom, in that school space. So for me, those are 3 red flags that I always look for when I go into a school environment.
Anyone else want to add any other red flags, any other things to look out for?
I would add disordered eating, not really eating, kind of changes in their eating behaviors or changes in their being engaged in activities that they used to really love and enjoy. They're kind of pulling away and no longer going to that club, going to that sporting event, or being a part of the team that they were a part of, kind of withdrawing and kind of not having an appetite, not really eating, just kind of being withdrawn to themselves.
And I think for educators, for me, it's always a red flag in that school district or that school building if there are no systems and logistics set into place for me to contact the clinicians. If I'm seeing these things happening in my class and I'm watching the student, or the student says something to me that really my gut is like, I need to send them to someone other than myself if they're free or open to it. I've been in schools where they've actually had a QR scan code where the teacher or the student could scan it, and then it will pop up for the clinician in our building, and I could say, I need you immediately, or the students could schedule some time. So that's where it's like, come on now, our kids know how to do that, and it's private. You literally could be standing there acting like you're taking a selfie, scan a QR code, schedule a meeting. You have you go in, it's on their phone, that's their pass, and then the clinician writes the pass to come back to class. That's what we see it doing it right, but we have to get creative. We have to literally train the teachers, let the educators in the classroom know these are some signs. And there have been times sometimes where when we speak to a parent, there's an easy way for me to say, hey, I spoke to so-and-so's mom. They are having a rough time right now. Please, monitor, this student in class. That's all. Like, teacher, we don't need the 400 or the 411. We just literally need the 4 to just monitor that student. And then and if we see something else, to go to the clinician in the building. And the last thing is, the reality is we're not just in a teacher shortage, we're in a clinician shortage. We don't have enough. They're not enough. And so we'll have, they are literally working hard in our building. And it's not enough because there's a lot going on in our regular life of the student. And then we're in a pandemic situation. So it has just tripled it. And so we definitely want to encourage our youth and our college graduates to go into their psychology, sociology, become a clinical therapist for schools and for youth.
From a red flag standpoint, what about labeling? Do you find, so as we're talking about all these red flags, emotional outbursts, isolating, just all these different things that we're talking about, is there, from the educator's point of view, or maybe not educators, educator versus teacher, right, Belinda, where we tend to see these behaviors and then file a student as this kind of a person, and then we've just decided that is the definition of that student, and then maybe not make any movements towards helping that student?
Yeah, I find that most of the time teachers do make an effort to help the students. Sometimes they don't know where to go or who to speak to about it. Sometimes students do get caught in the system. But if a teacher makes an effort to identify and label, that does not necessarily counsel the student out. It just means that the teacher realizes there's something that they cannot identify. They're not clear on how to help that child make progress. So it's always beneficial to go back to the teacher and have that conversation, that dialogue, and say, just explain to me exactly what you saw. You don't have to label it. Just explain to me what you see day in and day out. Give me an overview. What made you even think that there's a concern and an issue? What was your first red flag with this child? And once you have that dialogue with the teacher, with the educator, they're able to understand that what we're going to do now is work with those symptoms. We don't have to work with the label. The label will hold its own at another time, on another piece of paper, on another computer. But we're going to work with that human being, that human child in front of us, so we can work with the symptoms that you see that are going on. And then that partnership, that collaboration, that bond comes in between teacher and clinician, when I can say as a clinician to an educator, these are some strategies, some interventions. I'm sharing them with you. If you open your door, if you open your classroom door and I open my clinical door, I can come into your space and help bridge that gap so that I can actually display and show you exactly how to implement this strategy or this intervention in your space. But I can also work with that student to help him or her be able to utilize the strategies, interventions that I'm sharing with them in that space. I could also call the parents and say, these are what things we're doing at school. Do you mind trying them at home? So that we can continue to support that student. And so that's what makes it important to have that collaboration between the clinician and the educator, even though they may have labels, we put the labels aside and we really work with that student.
And I wanted to make this question clear, maybe dive a little bit more. This segues into what you're saying. We had somebody say, how do you get students to explain what is wrong? Someone said, I just had this happen today, and the parents came to school today for a disciplinary hearing. So how do you get that conversation to happen?
You have to kind of help students find the words. They may not have the words. They may not have exactly how they want to say and describe what's happening, but being patient, maybe having a private setting where you can maybe pull them aside, just you and them, away from everybody else, away from their peers, so that everybody doesn't have to hear and be privy to what's going on. I used to be a teacher, and this worked for me all the time. I would just pull them outside. They say, I want to speak with you, Miss Watson. And, the kids are working on something. I'm going to be right outside the door, and then say what's going on and just be really present, non-judgmental, open, and supportive. And knowing that whatever they say, they can trust you. That's where that relationship that we talked about before is so critical, because if they have that trust in you, they might not have all the words to say, but they'll show you in so many ways, and you just have to help them along with that.
I love this question, because I also think that I agree with Cherissa, being patient and allowing that relationship to have that factor of trust. But what I would do differently is I wouldn't say to a child that's hesitating to speak, I wouldn't say what's wrong. I would encourage that child to tell me what's going right. What do you feel comfortable with? What do you feel good about when you come into this space? And then from there, you can draw a picture of exactly what that child sees as good in that classroom. And then slowly you get to what's going on that's wrong. It's like, give me 4 good things before I get to the one wrong thing. Let me celebrate you and see where you are having your good days, what's going on that's safe in this classroom for you first. And then we'll get to what's unsafe for you. And that dialogue right there will give you all the information you need in order to move forward with that child.
Do you have any anecdotes for that? Yes, I was talking to a student, and here are the things they were saying. What does that look like from a student's point of view in terms of the things that don't make them feel safe?
Yeah. I definitely do, because I've always worked in schools. I think it's one of the most important things that I can do is to go into a school and work with educators, the students, the parents, administrators. So oftentimes you have students that they just do not want to reveal immediately what their concerns are. They hold it tight to them. They don't think that you're going to help them. And we have parents that may do the same thing. And so if you start with, tell me something that's going good, oftentimes the student will just look at you like, what's going good? But it reminds them that there's some things that are going well, or you would not come into this building every day. So they may say, oh, the school bus ride is nice. I like my football coach. I'm a good cheerleader. I like that. And then after they give you a couple of things that they feel like they're confident about, things that feel good to them, things they can trust you with, then you can say, oh, well, what about this class? It seems like you're struggling in that class. Are there some things that are good about this class? And they will hesitate, or they will tell you, these are the things that are good, but these are the things that I'm having problems with. One time I know there was a student that was really living below poverty level. And for that student, the difficulty was coming to the school. And we found out through conversation, it wasn't the school. The difficulty was that that student could not get access to laundry. So he felt very uncomfortable coming into the school and not having clean clothes. And so sometimes you'll see like an educator, I've seen educators take students' gym clothes home, wash them in their home washing machine, and bring them back the next day. So that student will have some confidence, feel good about him or herself, and go to gym class smelling fresh and clean. That's an educator. That's the one who goes above and beyond. And so for a student like that, if the school has access to laundry, I've seen principals do the same thing. It's those little things that provide those basic needs so that when that child is in that learning environment, they all of a sudden, it clicks for them. These people care about me. Let me listen to what they have to say. Let me do my best on Miss Gordon's test because she cares about me.
Yeah.
That's the human experience.
So having these students realize that these people that are educating us have my back. They have my back. They're not just here to talk at me. They're here to listen to the things that I have to say. And it seems like what I'm hearing from you is there's a lot of intersection here between trust and shame. There's a lot of things maybe even parents have shame about. They don't want to get blamed. They don't want to get yelled at. There are things they can't handle that they don't want to admit. Same with the kids. So it sounds like this relationship has to go not only through the kids, but through the parents and the caretakers as well.
Yeah.
Can you talk to us more about the shame piece of that and how to remove that?
I would say to normalize the struggles that we face, to normalize it. I know just last week I was working with a student, and I work at the college level, and having my session and checking up with them. I checked in on some different things we talked about before, but I just asked one question. I said, "Are you eating?" And her face completely changed. And she looked like she was gonna cry. And I said, "You can tell me. I know that it's okay. Just tell me. I can help you if you tell me." And she was like, "Wow, I didn't know that you really cared, but I know that you really care now. And I'm having trouble financially, and I'm working late hours, and I really don't have that much groceries. And so I was able to arrange, some emergency aid, some gift cards to get groceries and things like that." So I know in that moment, it was kind of a little bit, it was tough. It was tough for me and it was tough for her, but bridging that gap and saying, "Hey, it's okay. You don't have to be ashamed. You don't have to feel bad about something that's outside of your control. It's outside of your control."
And I am in the pre-K through 12th grade era with the group of kids. And I think one of the things I've seen with parents is that they had a bad experience in school, which translates to when we call and communicate about their students in school, is already a block. It's already a frustration. And then it turns into now we become a bother. And instead of us forging a unit front. So it normally takes us, we call it a 3-touch system. So I want to reach out to parents 3 times to get to know them, to communicate with them. How do you need to communicate with me? Positive, encouraging words, because then we form a relationship. And if there's a need for a readjustment, we call it, or a realignment in behavior or academics, then it's okay because they understand the angle and direction I'm coming from. And I also understand the angle and direction the parents are coming from. And when it comes down to shame, I think Cherissa and Belinda said it. It's just opening that door and building that relationship. I have had students come to me in the morning time and say, "Hey, do we have a wash and dry here at school?" And I'm like, "We don't. Tell me what you need." And literally, I've seen a teacher go to Walmart that day and buy some Walmart sneakers and wear them for the rest of the day because a student was being picked on about his Walmart sneakers. But this teacher was the teacher that all the kids loved. And when he put those Walmart sneakers on, it was a change. It changed the entire game. They were not Jordans. They are Walmart sneakers. And he was like, y'all joking on me about my Walmart sneakers? But look at my twin. And it changed the game. And it is us being able to, I think, normalize it. I think that's the word I heard. It's here for us to normalize certain things. It's also here for us to encourage them. And I do remind my students, you're not in charge of anything. You're still a minor. Like it literally is not your fault, but how can we help you?
So it sounds like meeting students and families where they're at, rather than having it all planned out. This is how it's going to go. Here, we're going to dictate to you how this is all going to go down. Instead, looking at each individual and being able to meet them individually where they're at. But can't you see educators and even the system going, do you know how much we get paid? Do you know how hard our job is already? I mean, how do you think this is going to happen? So I want to side with the educators in that way, for some empathy there, because that's a big load to carry, right?
Absolutely. As I said before, our educators, we have to do so much more to support them. Policies need to be changed. Salaries need to be increased, and respect for educators has to be increased. But now, understand now, I'm speaking about educators. I'm not speaking about teachers. Teachers are in a different category for me. They go into the classroom, they do their 7 to 8 hours, and then they leave. Educators linger. I remember one amazing educator, when you speak about anecdotal, we were at lunch and he had Oreos. Now, I love Oreos, so I snatched one, of course, and I watched him as he separated the cream from the cookie the entire time we were at lunch. And, we're talking, no one else is really paying attention to this. And afterwards I said, oh, so what was that about? Why are you separating cream from the cookie? Because I'm a clinician and that's what I do, I ask questions. And so he said to me, I have one student who loves the cream. And so I eat the cookie. And then later on, while that student is in tutoring, he has access to the cream. Now, a lot of people won't understand that. But if you understand relationships and how meaningful that is, and that Oreos, if I'm in poverty, Oreos are a treat. It's something that I can't get every day. I don't have access to this every day. But if there's somebody that remembers that the part of the Oreo that I like is the cream, you have just developed a relationship that's lifelong. That student will never forget that teacher or anything that was taught in that classroom environment. So for me, the relationship piece is so important and so fundamental that we have to make sure that when we are placing people, HR, human resources, when you place people in the school as educators, that you see beyond their degree. You see beyond them saying, oh, I'm willing to come in and teach. But what else are you willing to do? Because these humans need more. You're not going to get paid. You're not going to get rich as a teacher. Every teacher I know to this day has a side hustle, a side job, a side gig. They work somewhere else 10 to 40 hours a week doing something else so that they can make sure they have enough money to buy Oreos for the students in their classroom.
Which segues beautifully into my next question, because no one, hardly anyone I've ever talked with goes into education for the money, right? So how do we make this shift? Because I think there's the notion of burnout. You get in after so many years and you're like, this is not what I was coming in to save the world. I can't even get through my first few periods without being exhausted and just, I've emotionally given up. You know what I'm saying? And so how do we make this shift? Because that's valid. That burnout is valid.
Not save the world, Noelle.
Well, I mean, save the world, save the world. Save one kid at a time, save the world. I don't know. That's why I would go into education, because I think somehow I'm going to make a difference, right?
Yes,
So how
yes.
do we make this, first of all, the incoming teachers, there's gonna have to be a shift, but the teachers that are there that are tired, that are burned out, that don't want to go to Walmart to get their, you know what I mean? How do we ignite that passion in them? Because it all comes back to, right, supporting them emotionally. Obviously, they don't feel supported emotionally. They've got nothing to give at the end of it. So can we kind of talk about this cycle?
So I'm gonna say three tips really, really quick. The
No,
first
you
tip
don't
is
have
you
to
need
go
to
quick. Go slow.
the first tip is you need to pay the professional educators that are in your building. We went to college. We have several certificates and degrees that we have to maintain. And we have a license, several of us have license in several states to teach. And when you hear a first year teacher coming out and the starting salary is $35,000 and this is America, that's not acceptable. So we have to start there, really have to realign our pay scale. And it's almost like we need to go back and do that corporate America. So a teacher teaching in Mississippi and a teacher teaching in New York, if you're a first year teacher, why is the salary so significantly different? It's like significant, like, ooh. And we do understand cost of living. That is something we understand, but we also understand inflation. And so we want to make sure that we are paying professionals. The second thing is, I'm going to go back, and this is like something that's deep in my heart. We have to make sure that we are preparing educators. I love Bloom's, I love Maslow, I love all of them, but we actually have to get into the realness of these are human beings with entire families, with entire histories. And you know, people are like, no, they're pre-K. No, this pre-K has been for 3 years. They come with some stuff. they have seen some things and experienced some things, whether it is age appropriate or not. That is not for us to judge. This is how they're being presented to us. And the third thing is something that keeps me going on my roughest days after I've had a nice cry in my car, is that the adults are sending me their best. They are literally sending me their best. And as a village, as a group, as a community, it is my job to try and figure out and navigate and differentiate, okay, how do I make them into a productive citizen? And so with all of that, that's just the beginning. But those three things right there are the beginning. Burnout happens in all professions. Some professions are much more understanding and have systems in place to assist that. Where education, we have been behind the 8 ball. We are now, like, the avalanche is now coming upon us and we are under the avalanche. And so we have to stop guilting educators, and that's from administrators to cafeteria staff. We have to stop guilting them into doing things that is not great for their mental health, when we know what we need for our own mental health, and we need to allow them that space and opportunity.
We're getting all kinds of, like, practically hoops and hollers here in the comments, like, absolutely, well said, yes ma'am. So I feel like everyone is with us in this conversation. I wanted to bring in the topic of trauma.
Noelle, but can I just add one thing when it comes to supporting our educators?
Yes.
And I interact with lots of educators. One of the most important things that we have to do is support and advocate for policy change and salary changes for our educators. There is no reason why every profession should not be recognized and involved and engaged at the school board meetings. Those are our tax dollars. Those are our tax dollars that are paying for teachers, but also all the other things that are going on in the schools. And so we have to make sure that we are standing up, advocating for those teachers so they are not alone in the community, that they don't feel like they're always the only ones that are taking care of the educators, because we all need those educators, even those of us who don't have children. We have businesses And people from schools go to work for our businesses. They are our clients in our businesses. We all have a responsibility to be at school board meetings, to be part of the PTSA, to do whatever we can to volunteer in schools, to say, I have a business. I don't have a child, but I have a business. How can I support this teacher? How can I make sure there are books in this classroom? How can I make sure that you have equipment in your classroom that you need? How can I make sure that you have bottled water? Do we need to upgrade your coffee maker? What do you need? Because if we don't do those things for our schools, then we are saying that it doesn't matter. They're not important and they're not a priority. So we, at every profession, we need to step up and support educators in the schools.
We are all clapping for you, absolutely. So I want to get back to this emotional health piece, and like to define trauma, and talk kind of from an trauma-informed space here for a little bit, in terms of, let's just go ahead and start there. So let's define trauma, and then move into how that dynamic looks in a classroom.
So I can define trauma. Trauma is an emotional response to a traumatic event, and the event can range. There's different types of trauma that you can experience, and it might not be something that happened directly to you, but it's something maybe that you witnessed, but it has the same impact and effect just as though it happened to you. And it, what's traumatic for me may not be traumatic for you, may not be traumatic for Belinda or Benita, but we have different ranges in how we respond to trauma. What was the second part? How does it look in the classroom? Is that what you said?
We'll get to that. I asked too many questions at one time. The reason that I'm asking is because if we're talking about creating an emotionally safe space in order to create this excellent education, don't we have to take into account trauma, and getting triggered in the classroom, and kind of what that also looks like? Benita, I see you shaking your head. Go ahead.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. We have to be trauma informed. We have to be educated on what it looks like, what the signs and symptoms may look like, how it may present with students, to be able to respond in a manner that is supportive and helpful for that child to work through and heal and get connected to resources or whatever they need, based on what happened to them. So it's very, very much at the forefront, and it is something that we need to look for and we need to respond to, especially in light of the pandemic. Again, there's things that we're seeing that we've never seen before. I know for me in my clinical practice, I've never seen the level of trauma and the intensity of the trauma, but it's compounded by multiple factors. It's not just one incident. There's many things that are happening simultaneously that need to be worked through and addressed.
Are you finding, so this obviously necessitates the need for our educators to understand trauma?
Definitely, definitely.
Yeah. I found that the best educators assume that every student they're presented with has had trauma in their lives. That's just an immediate assumption, and that I focus on making sure my classroom is emotionally healthy, because the probability is that students that are walking into this space have had some type of trauma: physical abuse, sexual abuse, a parent or mental health issues, a parent incarcerated, discrimination, bullying, homelessness, poverty. These are all a part of trauma. These all yield to trauma. So teachers who understand that, they develop classrooms and systems and spaces. You can go into a space of an educator, into that space, and you will know immediately if there's an understanding about trauma in that space. It looks different, it feels different.
How does that look with the clinical relationship, right? No one's an island in any of the systems. So you have the teacher who is addressing the trauma, And then we go back to that notion of the educator who, I say teacher and educator, I realize I'm using them all kind of the same. You've now made me very self-conscious about how I'm using this. But that relationship right now with clinical becomes ever so much more important. What kinds of conversations need to be happening now for us as clinicians moving in the space of an educator?
So one of the primary conversations that I like to have with the educator is actually going into their space and sitting down with the educator and saying, you know, what are we working on here? What are things that you feel are coming to you into this space every day from your students? And helping them to identify what the student is bringing to their space from home, and then developing that teaching space, that education space, where students have a place to relax. I've been in classrooms where there is a calm down area, or a meditation area, or understanding that if I place a carpet down right here, there's some students that need that time to lay down on this carpet, not to sleep, but maybe to read through their materials, a place to decompress. There's a station over here where they can actually go and put their headphones on and do their work. And that gives them an opportunity to decompress in that space. And I'm still working. Like, teachers understand centers. In education, that's one of the things that they understand completely. So instead of just having a science center, or writing center, or a social studies center, they also add a center that addresses social emotional learning. So that to me is an indicator that that teacher understands that I'm going to have students come into my space that may experience some trauma. I could tell you in my office that I have in schools, I always set up a sand tray. And the sand tray is right on the edge of my desk. It's accessible to my students. They can come in, and while they're talking, they can calm down by playing with the sand in the tray. It's just a matter of running your hands through that tray, and it's calming. Just like when you go to the beach yourself and you walk on the sand, it calms you. But the interesting thing is, when my door is open and educators come in, because they need a moment to decompress, and they are sitting in that same chair. I may be engaged in doing something else, but they are running their hands through that sand, because they also know I just need to bring myself down so I can finish this day. Parents come into the same space and use that same sand tray for the same reason. So we have a responsibility to put things in place in our schools now that allow students to have a safe space to decompress, to meditate, to have a moment of mindfulness. That should be part of our school day now.
I love what you're saying. And, you know, we've talked about all the large changes kind of that need to happen in the system, pay, environment, just those kinds of things. What about immediate de-escalation techniques in the moment? Because I can guarantee you there are educators right now, clinicians who need some advice on this. Like, a chair just got thrown, someone's yelling. I just called an expletive, and I'm triggered now as the educator.
Yeah.
Talk us through some of that.
Go ahead, Cherissa.
Oh, I was gonna say, sorry. I was gonna say, getting students to connect to the here and now, and some grounding, some breathing, some relaxation strategies. Those are going to be in the immediate and, you know, right away to respond. That will help. Teaching them those. You have to kind of teach them those skills first. Teach them how to breathe. Teach them how to ground. Teach them how to meditate or be mindful, and then maybe have like a cue word or a trigger word for that, so that when they're starting to have their issue or have their those behaviors be present, you can kind of say that word and it will kind of spark, oh yeah, let me take a moment, or letting them go to the cool down corner or whatnot. You know, having some, I don't know if teachers are allowed to have aromatherapy, but aromatherapy, having those would help bring a calming, soothing response.
So I was gonna say that.
Yeah.
And so one of the ways, and this is, I don't even work at that school anymore, it doesn't matter. One of the things I would do, there's I'm not gonna say the name of the company, but my friend works for them and she sent it to me as a gift. It is a USB aromatherapy. So I would come in my room early and it was lavender. I think I put lavender in there. And I would come in early, plug it. It's a USB. I'm gonna send it to you later. Offline. And I would plug it in as I was getting my day started. And I would put on music. And I do not care. I've taught kindergarten, third grade, middle school, and high school. It is something, lemongrass is best. I'm gonna use that. It is something about music. And I would put in some jazz and it would be instrumental. And this would work. And I would make sure I unplugged. So I would put it in for like 5 minutes. That's enough to get the room engaged. And you know, it masks the smell of Lysol. And you know, you unplug it. And it was something about that. It is something about knowing your students' triggers. It is also something about feeling the energy of the room. Something is happening in the community. It's something, the fight broke out during breakfast. If there's something on social media that's just, you can feel it. And so a lot of times the teachers, we would say we had patrols or security officers, we would say, do you feel that? They would go, let me figure out what's going on in the community. Our clinicians would come in and we would text them, something is in the atmosphere. And so they would know, like, we would all be kind of like calming, but we're also alert because it feels like it's a shift. Full moons, it's a shift in the atmosphere. But and then one of the things you do have to acknowledge, sometimes there are great apps. And if you want a list of the apps, you can reach out to me. There's some apps I use. I use YouTube a lot. There's some great animated films that sometimes we watch in the morning. But I do want to say everyone jumped on the SCL bandwagon as we entered school physical shutdown and went to virtual, which is great, but if you're not doing it correctly, it is not helping. So please speak to a clinician. Please get proper training for social emotional learning for the age group and the demographics you have that works for them. Because there are going to be some kids that you're going to try some stuff and they're going to look at you like, no, no, thank you. And then it turns them off to mindfulness and it turns them off to growing their mindset and understanding what they need and who they are to help themselves become young men and young women. So we want to make sure that we're doing SEL appropriately and correctly and opening the door for our clinicians to come in. And a clinician should be able to walk into the classroom and sit in the back and observe. There have been times I said, I need you to come here. I'm doing something wrong. They can't get it together. I can't get it together. It's something not right. They've been able to come in and observe and give me some pointers because third parties.
So I'm aware of the time, and I did get through most of the topics. We had a bet going at the beginning, but I would be remiss if we did not talk at least a touch on substance use, touch on how that's affecting the classroom. I'm not going to continue with this question. I'd rather you guys jump into what does that look like now for educators and clinicians in the educational setting.
Noelle, I'm so sorry. You went out for me a little bit. I didn't hear your entire question.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you.
Okay, I wanted to talk about substance use, and I wanted to talk about how that dynamic now in the classroom, especially in light of vapes, right? How easy it is now. I mean, everybody's, up in arms about vape, what this is looking like for the educational setting.
Absolutely. That's a great question because our vapors are becoming younger and younger. They have access when we did not think they would have access. They have gained access to all types of vaping products and equipment. Recently, this is anecdotal, but recently I was talking to a young lady and she explained to me that her teacher was not aware that the students were actually vaping in the classroom as she was teaching. they would open up a window and they would vape, and they were not vaping lemongrass or apple. They were vaping marijuana inside of the classroom. And they knew, those students knew that that teacher was not present. They knew that teacher was not aware, or that teacher did not care. And so everybody wanted to be in that classroom because the opportunity to vape in school, that's like a dream come true for some students. And so I think one of the most important things we have to do as clinicians and educators as we collaborate and partner is to remember to share that information. The scene on the vaping world is changing so quickly. Sometimes we can't even keep up. And so when we know that these things are in our communities, we need to share that with educators. Let me show you what this looks like. This is what a vape looks like. Some teachers are not aware. Sometimes we have older teachers that are not aware of what's going on in the community. And that needs to be part of the teacher meeting. This is what we found on the school grounds. If you see this, this is what it smells like. If you smell this, that you are aware and that you allow yourself to take note of that and to help that student get to an administrator and or a clinician so that they can work these issues out with the parent. But be aware that there are things going on in the classrooms that educators, they have to maintain some understanding of the current trends in order for them to be successful in the classroom.
So I want to end on a message of hope for any educators, clinicians that are burned out in the educational setting, who feel hopeless, who really don't feel like there is a way out of their situation. They're just gonna get that paycheck and go home, and they're done. What is our message of hope for them?
You got this. You can get through this. You will get through this. Lean on your teacher friends, lean on your clinical therapist friends, talk through what you're feeling, talk through what's coming up so that you can see that you're not alone in what you're feeling and this burnout that's overcoming you, and talk with your peers and colleagues about what are they doing that's helping them. And maybe you can adopt some of the strategies that they're using, but it's definitely get support, take time for yourself, practice self-care, look at what's in your capacity and just do what's in your capacity. Do what you can with what you have while you can. Don't overextend yourself, even though it feels, the need is great. But I would always also say connect to the community. I think Belinda said it earlier. There's communities and businesses that maybe can partner with teachers and partner with clinicians to provide some support, provide resources so that it doesn't always fall on your shoulders. So reach out to the community and say, hey, can you adopt? I know there's like adopt a classroom. There's different ways to get help. So get help where you can and get support, talk it out with someone, and just take it one day at a time.
I love that, Cherissa, because the message is definitely you are not alone. We want to support you. We want to be here for you. Please, as I always say, hashtag just be open to the process, and trying therapy, because therapy is something that will help you in your personal and your professional career. It gives you an opportunity to talk through and walk through systems and some things that may be hindering you from moving in the way that you wish to move. And so I encourage educators to sign up for telehealth, to sign up to see a therapist face-to-face. Just try it. If it doesn't work for you, then it doesn't work for you. But just try it and see if you can make some connections between what you're going through as far as being burned out and how successful you are in your profession. So I definitely want to encourage all educators to collaborate with us clinicians in your area, and because we're virtual all around the world.
And I would say, one, understanding self-care is not being selfish. We give, and we know we empty our cups on a daily basis. Like we get home, like we laugh now, a lot of us feel like it's May and it's November. And we're coming home taking naps at 5 o'clock. Like, what is happening? So self-care is not selfish. And put some boundaries in place. You taking that work back home and it's sitting in the corner of your living room and it's sitting in the foyer and it's sitting at the front door and you picking it up the next day. No, set some boundaries in place. Use your planning time wisely. And then, and I would definitely say, and I heard Cherissa and Belinda both said, it is a community. We have a community, virtual communities I'm a part of. We have teachers of Instagram. We have educators on Instagram, on TikTok. So please tap into a community where we're able to vent professionally, but then also offer techniques and strategies to help us get through. Because yes, we do need to vent, but we also need to figure out, girl, okay, after you finish, what are we going to do? How are we going to maintain? And what's going to benefit ourselves, our community, our students? So put your boundaries in place and practice your self-care. Drink your water.
Love it.
Benita, Belinda, Cherissa, what a superb conversation. Thank you so much for just sharing your expertise with us. I want to tell everyone, you will get all of the contact information for these amazing clinicians in a follow-up email. Do not hesitate to reach out and ask more questions. I also want to say our next webinar is going to be December 2nd, noon Central, and it will be an incredible conversation on interventions. And we have an expert panel there, of course, as always. So I want to thank all of you. I hope you all have an amazing day, amazing rest of your week. What a great conversation. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Care.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.